Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Nicole Cromartie, and I'm the Director of Education and Programs here at the Clifford Still Museum. We are joined this evening by our former director, Dean Sobel, and a panel of visual and performing artists for a discussion about sustaining creativity over time. Dean Sobel, curator of the Late Works exhibition and founding director of the Clifford Still Museum, will be moderating this discussion with our guests. Tonight, we are pleased to be joined by Clark Rickert. Through his large paintings, Clark Rickert speculates about the nature of reality. Rickert explores symmetry and quasi-crystal geometry in paintings and prints. His group and solo exhibitions span the last 50 years. In addition to public and corporate commissions, his work can be found in the collections of the Smithsonian Museum, the Nelson Adkins Museum, Denver Art Museum, Kirkland Museum, and many others. Cleo Parker Robinson is the founder and artistic director of the 50-year-old Cleo Parker Robinson Dance. As a master teacher and choreographer and cultural ambassador, her organization encompasses Cleo Parker Robinson Dance Ensemble, Cleo 2, a youth ensemble, an Academy of Dance, an International Summer Dance Institute, a 240-seat theater, and a diversity of educational and community outreach programs. She is the recipient of honors and awards from international civic, community, and artistic organizations. And finally, Pamela Z is a composer, performer, and media artist making works for voice, electronic processing, samples, gesture-activated MIDI controllers, and video. She has toured throughout the US, Europe, and Japan. Her work has been presented at venues and exhibitions, including Bang on a Can, the Japan Interlink Festival, Other Minds, the Venice Biennale, the Dakar Biennale. She has composed scores for dance, film, and chamber ensembles. Thank you all so much for joining this evening. Dean, and everyone else, if you want to turn on your video and audio, I will pass it over to you to get the conversation started.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Nicole, for that wonderful introduction. You may not be able to tell, I am actually in the second gallery of the museum's current exhibition, Clifford Still in Maryland. So that is not a Zoom background, but I unfortunately am the only one. I'm all by myself here in the gallery. Before I say anything more, I do want to just acknowledge and give the respect to all of those who are enduring these horrible wildfires here in Colorado. If any of you are zooming in from out of state, we're just really suffering. And over the last 24 hours, it's gotten even more grave. So I just wanted to mention that as we enjoy the rest of our evening, try to enjoy the rest of our evening. I'm really, really excited to be part of this panel with my three esteemed colleagues. If you know anything about the three, there's a very interesting Venn diagram between the fine and performing and musical and performing arts that someday we'll have to draw, because as much as we identify perhaps each of them with a specific art form, in fact, all of them are very active in blurring those art forms. So it's it'd be really fun to unpack some of these ideas. I think you all know, or hopefully you know, that tonight's panel is really, I guess in some respects inspired by, but certainly comes out of my interest as I was working on this late work exhibition. And I became very fascinated with this idea of the challenges and considerations that face artists who are lucky enough, or in some cases I've been known to say maybe even cursed on certain days, by sustaining really, really long careers. And since they've all agreed to be part of this panel, I think they will agree with these concepts of early, mid, and late. But I wanted to ask the three of you, maybe just briefly, do you think about those terms much at all? Does it hold relevance to you at all as creative people and makers? Or is it something more that people like me who think about art more from a taxonomy standpoint tend to think? Why don't I start with Pamela? Why don't you go first? Am I sort of forcing a structure on you that you don't really see in the same way?
I tend to think of it more as a continuum for me. It's just that my life just goes on and I just keep doing things, and different I mean, I do think that when I start looking back at some of my older work, earlier works, that for example, these days with the lockdown and all of the, we're all sort of like in our studios. I've been doing a lot with documentation, like trying to revive documentation that's on old formats that we don't use anymore, and trying to digitize, documentation of performances and so on and so forth. So it is sort of giving me a view of like what my work used to look like and sound like a long time ago. And that is sometimes quite startling. And also sometimes it's like, I'm like, oh, I should do more of that, and other times I'm like, oh my God, this is, so I do think that there's change over time, but I'm not sure that for me that there's these signposts along the way. I think we have to think about those more when we're doing like grant writing and, where they say, we're looking for a mid-career artist or a emerging artist or this, or that. Then you have to say, well, which of those, am I, and,
Right.
but otherwise I think I tend not to think about it.
Clark, how about you? Do those terms really fall to the biographers and not necessarily to the makers? Middle career, is it more about putting things into chapters, or do you see some usefulness, I guess, in the terms we're using?
Who were you asking? I didn't hear.
I'm sorry, Clark, I was going to go down my screen.
Oh, okay.
Oh, Clark.
Sorry about that, Clark, go
My
ahead.
guess is that I'm the oldest one here. And I had this sudden realization at my last birthday is, oh my God, I'm getting old. So I'm now aware of that. But I do agree with Pamela that my work is pretty much along a continuum. And my latest piece which was depicted in the slideshow, the name of it was Quadrivium. That idea actually dates back to when I was in the geodesic community, Drop City. In fact, at Drop City, we attempted to build a theater dome, and part of the idea of the theater dome was to depict Buckminster Fuller's World Game. So Buckminster Fuller was the man who designed the geodesic dome, but he also proposed the World Game, which was going to be a large geodesic sphere hanging opposite the United Nations building in New York. And it was going to depict the world, and the people standing in the United Nations building would be able to play the World Game on this large sphere covered with tiny light bulbs. And he said that they'd be able to solve all the world problems. Or you could have teams, like you could have a team. I hate to bring up such a binary idea, but you could have a team of women versus a team of men and see who's better at solving the world problems. And my guess is it's the women. But anyway, the Quadrivium piece is very much informed by that idea that it dates back at least 50 years. It's a sphere, it's not a sphere, it's a geometric solid. It's around 14 feet in diameter, and it's covered with tiny little computer operated light bulbs. So, and if I have an agenda tonight, besides discussing what we're supposed to discuss and Clyfford Still and so forth, it is to promote the idea of something I think the world could use, and that is Bucky Fuller's World Game.
Thank you, Clark.
Wow.
Cleo, both Pamela and Clark think more in a continuum. Will you be the contrarian and say that you sort of do see your world in a more structured view, or do you join hands with your colleagues here?
Oh, I totally agree. I I don't think about it early career, mid, later, or whatever. I think about it like I'm just blessed to continue the work. And the work is very interesting. I mean, I think as Pamela talked about, spending time going back to documentaries because we have more time, that goal of mine that I would really, after all of these years, make sure that we had them, like Clark's work at Smithsonian, wherever the work is that people can see it so it lives. but who has time for that when you're making work? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm usually making work with a number of other people all the time. I'm never alone. I'm not a single artist. I'm a choreographer, but my work is dependent upon bodies, at
Mhm.
least my ensemble. And then I'm working with the choreographer, lighting designers, set designers, and costume designers. So I'm never really working in this solo thinking that it's mine. I think about it's ours, and whoever kind of comes into my life, wherever that fate is, that moment of whatever is happening, that's where I began to work. And so, one kind of experience kind of triggers another moment, and so I'm in it. So I never think we're stopping, but we have highs and lows, and I think I used to say there's only one piece that I'm creating. There's only one work, and it seems to evolve. But that work is, every time I create a dance, I go, and this is going to be new and so innovative and so where I'm at right now. And then I go, no, I'm only saying one thing, and it's really about freedom.
That's really
And it always manifests itself in very different ways.
Some people may know this, but Clifford Still thought of his life's work as sort of a single statement as well. And he sort of said and wrote as much too, as much as they, present themselves as individual works. He thought of it in the same way. I know that continuum, though, doesn't probably evolve in a linear fashion. It isn't like a daisy chain or something. If you were to think about adjectives that you might use to describe where you find yourself maybe in the last 10 years or so. I think often, I don't want to overgeneralize, but certainly with the abstract expressionists, I think there's enough evidence that there was a certain reduction, simplicity that the artists were able to find. So that might be reductive, could be an adjective in that respect. But for any of the three of you, are there certain adjectives or terms you would use to describe what has changed maybe in the last decade?
I would say, one word that I would tend to use is interdisciplinary, because as time goes on, my work seems to spread out more and more across different spectra, and when I get excited, when I see work that I like, it doesn't matter to me what discipline it's in. If I get excited about it, then then I really want to go into that world. And so as a result, I've started working a lot more visually in my work, using video and trying to build performances that are, and also making installations and thinking about sound inhabiting a space and so on. And working with dancers, working with very filmmakers, and uh so I think that's one of the things that sort of has become more prevalent as time goes by for me.
Would you say complexity then in your case? And again, that sort of goes against what I was initially proposing, but would you use that word, that in ways like starting with sequencers and your voice early in your career, would you say that it's gotten, in good ways, more complex though?
Yes, I would say to a certain extent it's gotten more complex, but maybe not so much more complex as just more multi-layered. The work.
Different, yeah.
Yeah.
Clark, how about you? Any adjectives that come to mind when you look back to the 1970s, or gosh, all the way back to the 1980s?
I think one word that holds up all the way through the 50 years is I'm very interested in geometry and structure and pattern. And when I say, by the way I got into art was through abstract expressionism. I loved abstract art. But my work, I do not actually regard as abstract. When I'm talking about structure and geometry, I'm usually talking about it as it occurs in nature and in math and other forms. So I don't really quite regard it as abstract. So when I look at a Clifford Still painting, I think it's correct to see it as abstract. And it might be something wrong with me, but I always find find some kind of representation there.
Yeah, they're pictures of things. Yeah, things that
Mm.
exist in other forms. Sure.
Mhm.
Clea, how about you? Any adjectives that come to mind, or just ways in which you do think if someone were to, be transported a number of years later, what they would notice first about what you've done over the last 10 years in all its manifestations?
Well, I don't know. I think, I feel like I'm more of a storyteller, that I've been inspired by people like Catherine Dunham, who worked with Buckminster Fuller there in St. Louis. And I was very interested in her mind, not always her choreography, but in the way her mind worked as a anthropologist. So I think about the passion that people have, what they're passionate about. Passion, I think that's a word that I think, and I look for that when I'm looking for dancers, because I always wonder what drove us to do this stuff for so
Yeah.
long, right? And I wonder, with dancers, because their bodies change, my body changes. I'm dancing and I'm going, I shouldn't be dancing. Then I go, yeah, well, if I expect my body to look like it did when I started at 21, then I'm in trouble. 72 will never, the 27 and 72, they don't look the same. So I don't even feel the same. And yet I'm blessed that something works. But but at the same time, when I work with dancers that are so technical, they're very technical, that I have to tell them, even though you have the ability technically, I want to know where that passion comes from. And usually it's compassion, like with Buckminster Fuller. What are we doing to influence the way the world is seen or felt?
Mhm, mhm. I mean, it is interesting to consider too that obviously a lot of what you're saying just comes with life. If we were to look back at ourselves in our late 20s or 30s, we just didn't have those same lived experiences, I think, and that certainly enters into the passions and the other things that we start to explore later in life. I think it's very safe to say that all three of you have achieved really remarkable success, reputations well outside of this, the Rocky Mountain region. Can we talk a little bit about that? How success in any number of forms might change the way you approach what you do? That probably brings in more distractions, and not that getting to where you are was easy, but how does that that element of success filter into what you think about over the last several years? Any of you, does that resonate at all?
Well, I guess it's helpful in that you get requests from people to do things, which can be a blessing and a curse, because sometimes it's overwhelming because you get people wanting you to participate in things, or wanting you to compose for them, or wanting you to be on a panel, or wanting you to be on a faculty as a visiting artist for some thing or another. And so for me, it's always been tricky because I never really had representation. I mean, briefly, I worked with a woman who was basically a booking agent in New York. She called herself my manager, but she wasn't really a manager. I mean, I was managing my own self. I wasn't being managed by someone, and that was just a brief. For several years, we worked together of her finding uh, some engagements for me for my large scale performance works, and that she really actually expanded my ability to tour those works, because I didn't know how to book those works. And so so what would happen is I'd create these large pieces. They'd have a huge budget. They'd happen. They would end, and then it was like on to the next piece, and then that piece wasn't getting shown again. And so the good thing that came through working with her was that she found engagements at different arts series throughout the country, and even in and overseas, for pieces that I would not have known how to book. I wouldn't have known. I learned from her how to budget for taking a big piece on the road and so on and so forth. But other than working with her briefly, I've never really
Mm.
had any representation or management. And so as somebody who is trying to, it takes pretty much all my time just to juggle, the administrative things around like responding to all the emails or and that takes away from the ability to actually make the work. So I think there's something that's tricky about having to navigate that.
Yeah, it sounds like you carved it out pretty well, it seems to. Clark, how about you? I know we're sort of into the career word now. You taught for a long time. You launched 1,000 ships at
Well,
Remco.
I was a teacher for a long time.
Yeah.
I
What
guess-
has it been like managing your career? All the responsibilities and maybe contradictions of what it is to be an artist.
What I was going to say is being a teacher made a lot of people know who I was. And so being known a little bit, I guess, is a form of success. And that form of success. So now that I'm retired, I'm working more than I was when I was a teacher. So I'm doing a lot of work, and what enables me to do this work, unfortunately, is money. And I don't have any money, but my projects cost a lot of money. So my last project, Quad Ribbon, was received. It was an expensive project. It was covered with little LED walls. It was very expensive. But now, with this panel is going to lead to more success for me. And here's the imagined success. It's a project that will cost a mere $5 million. And that will be what I was talking about before, the world game idea.
Right, that's interesting. Are those solid numbers, Clark?
It might be more than $5 million, actually.
Cleo,
Wow.
you certainly know a bit about complex. Your practice is inherently collaborative, and gosh, it has to be maybe more than any of us can realize. But what has it been like in that respect? What comes with that growth and the passion and the success? What are some of the other things you've had to learn?
Well, the piece I'm talking about, Quad Ribbon, was definitely collaborative.
Collaborative.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So I had the idea, but can I claim the piece as mine? Because other people, such as Ryan Elmendorf, did a huge amount of work, and his team.
Yeah.
So that was a collaborative project done by numerous people.
Yeah.
Including the fundraisers.
Oh, right, sure.
So
and getting it installed, obviously too, is not easy. Cleo, how about you? What is it like working with such a big company and the demands and travel and booking and the whole list? How has that impacted just what you did from the beginning of your career, I guess?
I just feel like we've been, you just don't stop working. You just work and work and work. There's no magic. It's all magic, but it's all work. You're working. And then you align with other people who love to work. We love to work. I mean, my mother at one point says, honey, can't you do something that's easier? And I went, probably so, but why? And my mother was a musician, my father, I watched them. When you see transformation, I think that's what takes place. I've seen Clark's work, the last one. It's magic. It's magic, unbelievable. And you look at it and you go, what did it take to do that? Then I'm listening to Pamela in her complex, voice and breathing. I'm thinking, I want to create something, like put it together. But, I think because I did grow up in Denver, I taught at CU, and we have that connection. I'm just hearing tonight that, we were there in the 70s. And I came out of a period of time that, maybe a little bit past the Chitlin circuit, where, we wanted to be seen. We wanted our voices to be heard. And so people opened doors. My manager was really my husband, and he was a mathematician. He was a math man and taught at Regis High School at a Catholic school, but he knew math. And that's why he loved seeing Clark's work. He was just like, this is what and I said, Tom, guess what? I'm gonna be on the panel with him tonight. But you know, he was a math man. And so he could manage me, sort of. I was not so manageable, I don't think. So, but he was my manager. And then I was able to have people, like, we worked during that time with, you know, we're coming out of the Black arts movement. That's what we came out of.
Mhm.
And so it was theater. It was theater. It was music. It was dance. It was, you know, James Baldwin. My father was the first Black actor in Denver. So I was already interested in how he would bring something so powerful to the stage. And he was my first dance teacher. But you know, I just think that I wanted to be in the world. My teacher was with the Met. Rita Berger out of Boulder was with the Met, and she was Jewish. And so she cared about lots of things. And I was her student, and she made sure that I followed my passion, which was to make Denver a place that people would understand, could bring a global essence of the arts, as well as any other place, New York, LA, San Francisco. It was really important that I did that. So taking my company around the world, we started in Nigeria and made a film there. And it was important that that there we were, having thousands of people see the company and making a film for the USIS. And so that was always important to me, that people would in the world see us. But how we got around the world, I cannot tell you. We didn't have any money. We wrote grants. We got rejected. We'd write another grant. We'd get rejected. We'd get an award, fabulous award. We'd have no money. But it all seemed to drive us and motivate us to be in the next place.
Yeah, listening to you, it's the love of the work that keeps all three of you going, I'm sure. I want to ask you another question that, you know, maybe we'll spend some time on this and maybe we'll move through it pretty quickly. And then we will open it up for some questions if there are any, and if not, we'll just keep going. But how much do you these days or ever think about legacy, knowing that the work will live on in any number of ways, you know, beyond your physical place here? Is that something that you allow in? Pamela, I'll start with you again. Do you think much about the long view?
In general, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about that. But like I said, in recent months, I have delved into, I have boxes and boxes of, you know, VHS tapes and recordings that were on DAT, digital audio tape, and then ADAT, which was like a digital audio multi-track format that you recorded onto these tapes that look like videotapes, and cassettes, and, you know, and even just later when optical discs became a thing, there's all these like little spindles with all these CDs and CDRs and DVDRs of a lot. You know, it used to be that we would stack things up onto CDs. And so I suddenly woke up one day and said, oh my God, I don't even have a machine to play back a lot of these things. So I had to go on eBay and find like an old, like somebody selling a VHS deck so that I could transfer and digitize some of these things, which some of them were the only documentation I had of the work that I did.
Were some of those tapes degraded in a way that you weren't expecting, or were they more or less?
You know, there's the image is still there. It seems it's not. I'm not 100% sure that this is true, but it seems like they get darker. Like the image looks darker.
Something changes probably.
But but and then, you know, with some of the those have held up better than like some of the optical discs where that stuff just peels off. And you start to they won't mount, you know, when you put them in the machine. And then, I have digital audio tape where if there's a lot of dropout because the magnetic particles
Yeah.
fall off of the tape, then you get errors when a machine tries to read it. So yeah, and so I'm realizing, so now I'm trying to transfer them all so they're all digital files.
Yeah.
And that's going to be hundreds of hours of work, and I need a studio assistant, but now with COVID, I can't seem to
Yeah.
have a studio assistant. It's like,
I hear you.
Ask you about COVID in a second. Clark, how about you in terms of legacy, either the physical, byproduct of all your years of labor, or in terms of what happens to it? There's probably a big collection you have somewhere in your studio.
Yeah, well, like one wonders, after I die, where does all that work go? So, and that seems problematic. But also problematic, but less problematic, are small things like drawings. So like I did hundreds of drawings years ago, which strangely I kept. And now all of a sudden they have value. People are paying money for them, quite way more than I ever expected. And my daughter and my partner are both, if I can't throw away a drawing now because they'll wait, no, stop, I need to go to an archive. And so now we're wondering about archive. And one thing about Drop City is there are people interested in archiving Drop City artifacts, like the Smithsonian is.
For good reason, yeah.
So, so I think archiving is an issue, and I think I am among many artists, older artists, who have the same problem. What are we going to do with all our stuff? So I have an idea of getting a big warehouse in southern Colorado and just filling it up with art. Then when we die, the warehouse will still be there.
Yeah, fantastic. Cleo, how about you? Certainly you must think about the company living on and on. Does the word legacy hold any specific meaning to you in that respect?
Yeah, every time anybody sees me, they say, "And you've retired?" And I go, "No." No. And then I know they're encouraging me, and I'm thinking, I feel that I'm inspired every day to somehow inject the legacy, because I don't feel I'm just representing myself. We've been so fortunate, and that's what I felt as a choreographer in the beginning. I mean, I started out as a young choreographer, and I knew nothing. I mean, all I knew is that I wanted to move and dance and say what I wanted to say. But there were great choreographers that I was able to bring to the company. And so I carry their work, and that's my responsibility. And so keeping their works alive and keeping the stories alive is a part of what I know I have to do. Now, how to do it and stay in the rhythm, these are like two different rhythms. One is to stay clearly making sure that things are said and stored and presented and preserved. And the other is to keep everybody moving. And so they're a little bit two different rhythms. And but I have lots of people who are really concerned about legacy right now. And I think during COVID, it gave me time to sort of think about it. I remember what's so wonderful is that my son is our executive director. And I know that he is very clear that a lot of the things that he's doing, which is the business side of it, Clark, where are the dollars going to come from? What is the building going to be? Will we have a new building, which is we've never had in 50 years? So getting that done. But having the dancers understand, it's sort of Sankofa, to know where they came from, to know where we're going. And they will just go. They don't need all that they think, but I think it helps them to know part of that legacy is really critical. So we do things like today on Thursdays, the whole company and staff come together and we sort of do games, just talk about different things about who we are, what we like, what we don't, the things that we want to share. But we've learned a lot about the organization. And in my being able to share it, I know we're passing on the legacy that way, but our work is at the Blair Caldwell Library here in Denver in Five Points. So a lot of our work, and then a lot of the work is at DU at the dance library there. And then my work is really in different libraries around the country, because I'll come in like I've taught at Irvine, and I was doing research on Catherine Dunham, and I said, you know, I'm carrying on her legacy, and I do her role, Barrel House Blues, and you know, she's worked with my company, and we carry on that work. So, and Donna McHale, I was working with Donald, and I said, I just want to pull some of their work out, and they said, well, don't you want to see your work? And I said, my work? Okay. And so you know, so you don't know quite who they had. My lectures, they had all kinds of things. And so it's very exciting to know that our work is, and I had a poet, Shalene Qualls, who did the poetry, and now we're coming back to some of that, and she's in San Francisco. And it's really exciting to think we pulled a piece of, it was the piece that I did with Gordon Parks, and we did that piece again that I did with Nikki Giovanni and so on. And so to pull those pieces back, you go, whoa, did we do that? You know, and that was, so I pulled some of that. We were kind of bold and fierce and stuff like that. And so I look at these young people and I go, that's the energy that we need right now.
That's wonderful. Say, I'll check with the museum staff. Nicole, are there any questions from our patient listeners?
We actually have quite a few questions lined up. Yeah. The first one comes from Robert, and it seems like the election, of course, is on a lot of people's minds. You know, the presidential debate is following this conversation this evening, which we were talking about before we got the panel started. So our first question is from Robert, who asks, how has President Trump and his administration changed your artistic lives?
Changed
the present day.
I don't know that I can pinpoint anything specific that I mean, he's changed life in general, and introduced a lot of stress and strife in the lives of a lot of people. But I don't know that, so I feel like anything that has a major effect on life in general will also have an effect on the art, but maybe it's not in a really easy to quantify way. Yeah.
Cleo or Clark, anything that specific? And feel free, you know, if not the president in particular, you know, either the pandemic or systemic racism, are these, you know, really urgent and current topics changing what you do at all?
Well, I don't know that he reminds me of the times that we have been through, and we've been through some very difficult times. And I think these are very difficult times. And I think he, I don't think he even thinks about art. I don't think that doesn't ever come across as a president, not like Kennedy, that I come from the Kennedy time and the Kennedy Center. And I come from Bill Clinton. I served in Washington during Bill Clinton's time. I knew he cared about music. He would have artists always present. Aretha Franklin. I mean, it was a very different time, very different time. And I think that it because we're in this time, it makes me realize that our work is more serious, that we have to do our work, and we have to fight for that we know is important, even if we don't have an administration that even speaks of it.
Yeah, well put. Clark, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I'll say Trump really depresses me. It seems like every day gets more depressing and more depressing. And it just amazes me how negative things are going with him. But so what's needed now is some art. You know, when you work on art, then you can kind of escape the depression of Trump. And looking at Pamela and Cleo gives me an idea. This is an idea I've had for about 30 years, or dating back to Diana Ross and the song. Remember the song Dancing in the Street, Dancing Around the World? So like, I like the idea of the world game. Well, another thing here's an idea I have: a worldwide dance and music all simultaneously. That would cheer me up. Even,
Let's do it. Let's do it. I'm ready.
The three of you could pull it off, I think. Hey, Nicola, do you have another question for us? Or for the
I wanted to point out, Nicole, that I noticed there seemed to be some questions in the chat as well as in the other.
Yes, thank you, Pamela. Yeah, they're coming on the Q&A and on the chat. So I'm just doing them in order. Our next one comes from Emily, who asks, have you ever felt a pressure to continue to make in a certain way? For example, if a particular body of work or creation was especially successful, I wonder how you decide to move forward. Do you continue with what works or keep pushing for something new?
Well, so I'll just jump in and say that it's always been a principle of mine, and how well we are able to stick to those principles is another question, but it's always been a principle of mine to never make art to try to please someone or to try to be popular or to, that you think it's going to get a positive response, but to make art that is powerful or moving to you, or that you feel compelled to make. So I tend to try to shy away from saying that worked really well, I should do another one of those. Instead, I just want to make what it is that is asking to come out of me at that time. But that said, I'm sure that we're all unconsciously, influenced by having had a good response or reaction to something. I should also add that what makes me feel like a work is a successful work is not necessarily that it got a good public response, but that I see it and find it to be strong some way. And I've always sort of tried to make what I feel is strong, and then assume that will find its audience.
Really good question. Clark or Cleo, any other thoughts on that?
I've thought about that. It reminds me of something that John Fudge told me. Have you ever heard of John Fudge? Here, I'm going to show you a John Fudge painting here.
That's terrific.
There's a John Fudge painting.
Oh, wow.
But I think some people, I think a lot of artists get sometimes perceived as doing the same work over and over and over again. Like Mark Rothko, one of my favorite artists, was often accused of making the same work over and over again. My argument was, no, they're all different. But John Fudge told me, I am not going to make a painting unless I have an idea. And if there's no idea, I'm not going to make a painting. And his painting was definitely idea paintings. They're maybe they could be called surrealism, but there's a stylistic continuity between the work, but each painting is a fresh idea. So I think as long as you have a fresh idea, then you're not going to be repeating yourself. But other people might see you as repeating yourself.
I think we do develop a style. I'm always interested in when somebody says, Cleo, I have a dancer for you. It's your dancer. It's a Cleo dancer. And I go, and tell me what that is. Tell me who that is. So other people kind of define you, and you sort of listen and go, tell me, okay, explain that more. Who am I? What does that mean to you? But I think choreographically, I do know that we get caught up in labels, and the labeling of what I've experienced as an artist, as a choreographer, is very interesting, because I don't necessarily want to be labeled, because anything that inspires me, and I have to say, is what's authentic to me. And we're influenced by the world. We're influenced by everything, anything. So giving us that palette to be able to do that. But now I may have the same kind of movements that I like, that feel very familiar to me. But I may have a dancer that as I give them that movement, they take it somewhere else. And then I go, it's much more interesting than what I just gave you. Let's keep that. So it for me is a moment of creativity that I try to stay open to. But I remember in the early days when we were doing works that were inspired by Alvin Ailey. So that was the company in New York. I went there at 19, and Arthur Mitchell and Alvin Ailey, that was the world. And Shalene Qualls, who came out of Howard University and worked with all of the theater directors in New York during the Black theater movement. And I mean, that's how we came. And we had dancers. It was so beautiful. Like Winifred Harris, who's my associate artistic director now. Even now, she keeps that legacy going, but she brings in lots of other ideas that I work from. But I remember when I was doing some of the work, and I had a writer of the poster, the news. They both wrote about the same way about me. Usually white men writing about the work that they did not understand I was doing. They began to understand, but they were coming from a different perspective and sort of a judgmental place. And that pushed me because it was sort of like, you need to stick to your blues and your jazz. I love Carmina Burana. And so I created it with the symphony and did it the way I saw it. Very different than John Butler. I was inspired by John Butler, but I didn't want to do it the way he did it. So when I chose to do it my way, and I that was one of my greatest moments in my whole choreographic life, I thought. And then I got this terrible review. And then I went, how dare him tell me how I should hear music or see the world? And then it sort of inspired me to go, the world is wherever I want to go. So that you know, you never know. And then sometimes I want to come back to my blues. I want to come back to my jazz and hear it in a different way or whatever, you know.
Wonderful, thank you. Say, Nicole, I know we're past 45 minutes. Do we have time for another question, or should I turn it back to you to sign us off?
I'd love to take one other question. It's for all of the panelists, and it seems like a good place to end. They're asking, do you have any advice for artists who are firmly in their early years?
Who wants to take that one?
Does that mean first, second, 3 years, 5 years?
Well, I always tell people that I have sort of two things that I think are really important. And one is go out and see art, go see other people's work. Now, of course, we're in this situation where we're not allowed to go out, but go out on Zoom or whatever, however, or now you can actually go into the, socially distanced into the museum or whatever, but go support other people's work, see the work, be inspired by it. Don't just hermit yourself into your own little world where you have no influence or and it's not that it's not that you'll learn something. It's not that you're going to try to emulate what you see, but you may be inspired or moved by it. And you may be moved because you say, oh, that was terrible. I don't want to make anything ever like that. Or you may say, that was amazing. And that really moved me. I want to make something that is moving in that way, and also you want people to see your work and support your work. So you should be seeing and supporting their work. So that's my one thing, is go out and see the work. And the other thing is make work. People are always saying, someday I'm going to make this or I'm going to do that. And they're working towards some goal that is so far away from what they can actually imagine right now that they're always talking about it as if it's off in the future. And I say, if you really think of yourself as an artist, you have to be making art. And so just make those things and make whatever version of it you're capable of at this point, and just keep going forward. Don't hold off on making the work, because you'll one day wake up and say, oh my God, I never did it, so.
Clark or Cleo, any advice for budding creatives?
Clark, are you thinking?
Oh, I didn't hear my name. Okay.
Oh, no, I just like the order. It's always I'm a dancer. I go in, you know,
Yeah.
I'm the third soloist. I don't know. I love that.
Anyway, I totally agree with what Pamela is saying. Look at art. And for how many years? 30 years, I was an art teacher. And one of the main things I pushed in my art classes was art literacy, seeing what's happening in the art world today. Not copy it, just see it, be informed by it, see what's going on today. And in fact, I gave them a list, and a lot of people did not like my list. It was called the 100 must-know artists. And I know there's something wrong with that idea too. Anyway, it looked to me like if they would inform themselves about what is happening today in the art world, their art would improve a lot. So, so I really agree with that idea. Look at art. Then the other half of the idea I agree with too. If you're a painter, stretch up a canvas, put your paintbrush in the paint, and then make a mark on the canvas.
Get started. Right. Oh, I totally agree. I'm totally in agreement. You know, in the early days, when I think art was not as accessible, it wasn't as inclusive, it wasn't as equitable. I mean, and I taught dance. I mean, I always had a dance studio. So I would always take the dancers to anything, anybody who was showing anything, dance, theater, art, they have to experience it. Because once you do, you feel rich. It's a richness, and you get to decide what to do with it. And so it's yours. It's yours. That's the power that I think, that's the empowerment that I think art gives you. And sometimes you feel really lonely or very sad, and something distracts you. I mean, maybe even the painting behind you, Dean, where you go, I mean, I feel that darkness right now. I feel that I want to express that moment right now, and let them find that moment and discover it. And it becomes, their life is important. It has meaning at that moment. So I discovered that with young people that, and then some of them would say, that was horrible. My teacher would walk out of everybody's concert, but she didn't have a dance company. I'm like, Pamela, I'm not walking out of a concert. If I walk in, I'm going to give them the respect. I'm gonna try to discover something that aligns with me, even if it's so surreal. Like I used to work with John Cage, and when John Cage would play all those sounds, I go, this is not music. And then later in my life, I went, he's a genius. I mean, it went from, you know, what is this, to finding the genius in it. So I think we have to support each other's work. I mean, it's very important that we do, but you've got to just be open and be exposed to it. And I do think with the pandemic, I mean, people are seeing so much more.
It is, isn't it bizarre?
Yeah.
I'm finding that I'm attending all these concerts and talks and things like that because you're sitting here in this chair and there's no mustering the energy to do the commute to somewhere, or worrying about how you're going to get back at, and blah 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 blah. You just like tune in and see all of these things, and so it's a mixed blessing.
And I know, I've noticed there's a lot happening on Zoom. So it's almost as if the pandemic created Zoom.
Yeah.
Form of creativity.
I never knew about Zoom. It's a whole new life for me.
And
but tonight, I'm creating tonight our Granny Dances to a Holiday Drum that I've done for 29 years. And I wrote it collectively with wonderful artists for all these 29 years. And I've had music and dancers and children and 100 people. And now I'm on Zoom going, there are 4 people on stage. That's how many people I can have. And my mind is bogged down with, how do we make the power and the energy of what we actually had in this village translate on a Zoom? Mm-hmm. So that's the challenge. We get to do it.
Yeah,
huge challenge. Well, thank you all so very much. It's interesting how again, like I said at the beginning, how much you do overlap and see many things in the same way. And maybe there's a budding collaboration that we could encourage between the three of you, either locally or around the world, knowing Clark's aspirations. But thank you. The wisdom that the three of you exude, says a great deal. And I'm very grateful that you indulged me and our listeners in this fascination with Clifford Still and his later work. That exhibition stays up through middle of February. We have our course, the museum is open on a limited basis, advance tickets only. But Nicole, I'll turn it back to you to sign us off.
Dean, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks everyone on the panel. This was a fascinating conversation, and thank you to everyone for watching and doing another Zoom thing with us here at the Clifford Still Museum.